America with Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen. And now, Archbishop Sheen.
Fellow Americans, something interesting happened on the plane the other day. I overheard two women in front of me talking about a diamond. One woman said to the other, "Oh, that's a beautiful diamond you have, Mrs. Plotnick. I would love to have a diamond like that." She said, "I know, it's about 40 carat. But like all the great diamonds of the world, the Hope Diamond, for example, this has a curse on it. It's called the Plotnick curse." Well, what is the curse, Mr. Plotnick? The title of this telecast is "Thank God for America." We are trying to awaken a little bit of Americanism in the lives of our people. I know of a mother who was giving a party for neighborhood children. And as she was serving her own little son, he said, "I don't like chocolate ice cream. I don't want chocolate ice cream." The mother said, "Listen, I didn't want you either, but I learned to like you, so eat it." So you're not going to find a better country than America, so like it, love it. I'm going to tell you, well, I have no papers, I have no notes, anything of that kind. In lectures, you know, if speakers have notes, you can always say, "Oh, he's only got 6 more inches to go." But I always have to finish on time. But I will tell you the plan of this particular telecast. I'm going to talk, first of all, about the American Constitution and the source of rights and liberties. And I'm going to talk about our form of government, the way it is constituted. And then thirdly, I will talk just a little bit about American life, particularly from an economic point of view. First of all, our Constitution and the source of rights and liberties. Where, for example, do you get the right of free speech? Where do you get the right of assembly? Where do you get the right to own property? From the will of the majority? No. If you got your freedoms and your rights from the will of the majority, then the will of the majority could take away the will of the minority. The majority in American life is the custodian of minority rights. Where do you get then your rights and liberties? From the state? Oh, no. If you got from the state the state could take them away. Tax time, it takes almost everything else away, and it could take away your rights. Where then do you get your rights and liberties? Our founding fathers had to answer that question. They looked abroad and they saw Parliament giving rights, power giving rights. They rejected all of those theories, and they set it down in the second paragraph of the Declaration of Independence. It is a self-evident principle that the Creator has endowed man with certain unalienable rights, among which are the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In other words, you get your rights from God. That's where you get them. And that is why nobody can take them away. Then Article 9 of the Constitution adds, when certain rights are mentioned in the Constitution, it must not be assumed that the people have no other rights than those granted by the Constitution. So your rights, you see, are God-given. Therefore, unalienable. Now let's be proud of this source of rights and liberties and compare with it the Soviet Constitution. I've told you where we get our rights. We get our rights from God. Where do you get your rights and liberties? In the Soviet Constitution. The Soviet Constitution sets up a monolithic state before you ever come to a mention of rights and liberties. Think of it. 116 articles establish a communistic state as the source of any rights the citizens enjoy before the word right is ever mentioned. And then after wading through all of these articles and all of these chapters, you say, when am I going to get a right? What is it? Do you know what your first right is? In Article 117, it's the right to work. Now, Article 133 says, but you may not strike. What other rights are recognized, not guaranteed? The Soviet Constitution does not use the word guarantee. It uses recognize. Freedom of the press. I think that's Article 125. Where do the Soviet citizens get the freedom of press? Freedom of press, freedom of assembly, says the Constitution, are recognized for all Soviet citizens on condition that they are used to support the communist system. Well, suppose you didn't want to support it, and you do not have the right of free press. Freedom of religion, Article 124. This is tricky. They say freedom of worship, and freedom of anti-religious propaganda are recognized for all Soviet citizens. Notice the clever distinction. You have freedom of worship, but you have to get permission from the state to have a church. You have to get permission from the state to have worship. May you, in that church, catechize children? No. Why not? Well, because that's propaganda. The right of propaganda belongs to the Soviet state, not to the people. Could you publish a magazine? No, that's propaganda. Could you talk on a street corner? No, that's propaganda. And all propaganda is reserved for the anti-religious. Now you see the difference in our constitutions. Where do we get our rights and liberties? We get them from God. Where do the Soviets got their constitution? They get it from the Soviet state. And therefore the Soviet state can take them away. Now we come to our Constitution, or rather the setup of our government. Lord Bryce said that we had the greatest governmental document that ever fell from the hands of men. Our Constitution is really based upon conscience. The conscience of each and every one of us has, first of all, a legislative function. The conscience has an oughtness about it. You ought to do this, you ought not to do that. For example, I ought not steal your watch. Now, I hope none of you are missing a watch at the end of this telecast. That's legislative side of our conscience. Then there comes the judicial side. There's a judgment that is passed. You stole the watch. That's the judgment that passed on my action. Thirdly, the executive side of conscience, which has restore the watch or suffer punishment. That is the way our American Constitution is built up. Now that means then that the legislative function of Congress becomes our legislature. The judicial function becomes the Supreme Court. And then we have the executive branch of government, which is the president. And these are all constructed so that one balances the other. Now let us study the Soviet Constitution and the Soviet government, not Constitution, government. That starts with Brezhnev. How do you spell his name? Is it S or G, Z or something? Put it in for good measure. The government starts with, the name is not important, the Secretary of the Communist Party. He is the head of the government. Now below him is the Presidium. With 37 members. Below him, and the president of the Presidium is called the President of the Soviet Union. Below him is the Politburo, made up of 15 members. Below that are two houses, two Congresses. One, the Congress of Union, which has 767 members, and the other is the Congress of the Republic, which has 750. All of the government, all of its functions, is determined by the Secretary of the Communist Party. He decides, along with his Politburo, who will be candidates for office. There's only one party, remember. You do not vote on two candidates. That's one of the reasons why the elections in Soviet Russia always turn out as pure as ivory soap used to be. 99 and 44, 100% pure. Everybody has to vote for the candidate that is ordered by the Secretary of the Communist Party and his Politburo. So that the whole state, therefore, is in the hands of one man. Now this means, therefore, that the citizens have very little freedom. Solzhenitsyn, in his book Gulag Archipelago, tells about a president of the Moscow section of a paper factory. The former one had just been sent into Siberia, and a new one was named. As was customary, he says, at all of these meetings, the name of the secretary of the Communist Party was mentioned. That was Stalin. And everyone began applauding, which they had to do. 3 minutes, 5 minutes. Everybody was getting tired, standing, applauding. 8 minutes, 11 minutes. When would the squirrel stop running around in this cage? Who would stop the applause? And the new head of the paper factory sat down, and everyone sighed with relief. He was arrested, sent away to prison, and he said, well, someone had to stop the applause. And the communist agent said, because the guards were all about seeing who stopped the applause first. Don't you know Darwin's law, survival of the fittest? So you keep on applauding. You see how very different our government is from theirs. And then notice, too, we have had in our government a transfer of power, of executive power. There were no mobs on the street. The military did not take over. It was done peacefully and gracefully. But did you know that 43 out of the first 53 secretaries of the Communist Party were executed? Did you know that 15 out of 17 of the writers of the Soviet Constitution of 1936 were executed? Did you know that every single member of the Politburo of Lenin was executed except one, and that was Stalin, and they regretted that ever since? Now, don't you think we ought to thank God for our American government? These are the blessings under which we live, and it behooves us. Excuse me, I was looking at my clock to see how much time I had. It behooves us, therefore, to be grateful for our Constitution. Now, as regards our life, our economic life, I will pass this over rather quickly, but it's worth recording. Suppose that a husband and wife were working together in the Soviet Union. What is the average pay of a husband and wife combined in the Soviet Union? You know what it is? $350. You know how much a pound of coffee costs? If you can buy it, find it, $3.60. Do you know what platform shoes cost? Imported from Yugoslavia? $40. You know how much Levi's cost? $160. Would you like to pay out half your salary for a pair of overalls? That's what they have to do. Why can't we be conscious of the blessings that we have in this country? Sure, the price of living is high. I know it. I do my own housekeeping, and I have to go out to the store and buy my groceries, and I know what it is. Now let us have some suggestions about how to keep America great. And one of the first suggestions I would say about America would be not to take politics too seriously. I think that we are now making politics an absolute. Centuries ago, religion used to be the absolute, and men fought and killed for that absolute. Wrongly, but there was an absolute. Then there came the Edict of Tolerance, if not. And we're now settling down to ecumenism. Politics is becoming our new absolute. As if it were the final solution of all the problems. Actually, is there a great deal of difference anyway between the parties? Tweedledum and Tweedledee. What we have to look for is leadership and honesty and true Americanism. That must be the heart of politics. Then the second suggestion. The second suggestion, I would say, would be aid to the poor of the world. We are only a small percent of the population of the world, but we control 56% of the world's resources. Out of 2.5 billion people in certain parts of the world, 40% are undernourished and 10% are starving. In America, or rather in the rest of the world, it is generally accounted that 1 acre is required for every one person to feed and care for them. In America, we have 2 acres required to meet our very high standard of living. Our military budget amounts to $82 billion. $82 billion. Our aid to poor nations of the world was only $361 million. There are 2 kinds of hunger in the world. The hunger of body and the hunger of spirit. The rest of the world has hunger of body. We have hunger of spirit. Our hearts are empty and lonely. And we should redress this balance by beginning to give to the poor nations of the world some greater share of our resources. When you think that every single person in the United States, on an average, pours out 5 pounds of garbage and waste a day, you begin to realize our duties to the rest of the world. I'm very conscious of this. I've been interested in this problem for years. And as a matter of fact, I refuse to accept anything for telecasts. Every telecast that I've ever given in my life that has had proceeds has been given to the poor of the world, as has this series been given to the poor of the world. Because I feel a deep obligation on the part of America, and I cannot recommend what I do not practice. Now we come to the third and final recommendation. We have a Statue of Liberty in the East Coast, in the New York Harbor. Here is this great lady holding up the torch of liberty. We're grateful for our liberties, but we're beginning to forget in the United States that a liberty from, or rather freedom from something, implies a freedom for something. We've begun to be egotistic and selfish. And almost the American cry is, do your thing, or I gotta be me. Do your thing. Is that life? What happened to neighborhoods? What happened to the pound of sugar that the lady wanted next door to borrow? Life is built up not by doing my thing, but by doing someone else's thing. That's the meaning of charity. It's the meaning of patriotism. It's the meaning of love. So it would seem, therefore, that we need to do a bit of balancing. And for all the emphasis on liberty in the East Coast, let's put up a statue on the West Coast, a statue to duty and responsibility. Let us take that torch that the lady holds on the East Coast, and in the West Coast, let her stretch out her arm to the unlighted torches, to the unfed peoples, to people who are not able to do their thing because they're interested in someone else. And then perhaps when America is sandwiched in between the two, we will begin once more to be a great people. You see, rights are always balanced by duties. There's never a right without a duty. Never, never, never. They're like the concave and the convex side of a saucer. We're always stressing our rights. Now we have to stress our duties. And looking back over the glories of this country, there's only really one regret that I have about America, and that is that our Supreme Court decided that we could never pray to the God who gave us unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That makes me sad. But maybe a day will come when we will see a sign on our schools, in case of atomic attack, the federal law and the Supreme Court decision about no prayer will be temporarily suspended. Thank you. Bye, and God love you.